You're listening to Genocide in Ukraine, a podcast where we uncover truths the world cannot ignore. We shine a light on Russia's latest genocide against Ukrainians, part of a long history of such atrocities and a systematic campaign of destruction that is shattering lives, threatening the international order, and challenging the conscience of humanity. Through expert insight and stories of resilience, we're delving into the human cost of this crisis and the global implications of inaction. This is more than a conflict. Ukraine is fighting for survival, justice, freedom, and for human rights everywhere. Stay with us as we seek understanding and demand accountability, because the truth and human rights matter.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you're having a good day. It is good to see you all, and we will, I think, get going rather quickly today, because look at us, all up here and ready to go. I will do a really quick timestamp, and then we'll go around and say hello to everybody, and that's how we'll get started. I'll do a shorter modified timestamp than normal, but we'll hit some spots. It is currently Friday, June 19th in part of the world, but not all of the world. So we're going to check out what time it is where. It is 1:01 a.m. in the UK and 3:01 a.m. in Ukraine. In the workers' paradise of Perth, Western Australia, it is 8:01 a.m., which means then that it is 9:31 a.m. in Adelaide, Australia, which just blows my mind. How can you be a half an hour off? And right along with them, we have still on Thursday, June 18th, St. John's in Newfoundland and Labrador. And in New York City, it is 8:01 p.m. and on the Pacific coast, in the Pacific Northwest, it is 5:01 p.m. And I always have to end on it, but in Anchorage, Alaska, it is 4:02 p.m. Alaska, where Sarah Palin could see Russia from her house. She's still stalking me, and yeah, something about a lover maybe one day, but I don't think she's going to get back into politics. That's my opinion. So, Nancy, I know you are busy putting stuff into the nest, but how are you today?
I'm doing good. I was sick for a few weeks, but I think I have my voice back, and no one will have to suffer any coughing from me, so it's a good day.
That's always a good thing, and I'm glad you're feeling better. And Gina, how are you doing today?
All right. As I always say, grateful to be here. It's bittersweet. We come together for a painful reason, but glad to shine some light in the darkness.
Absolutely. And we do come together to shine some light in the darkness. And it's I wish we didn't have to be here, but I'm glad we have the opportunity to shine the light in the darkness, right? Because there is darkness happening, and we see every day the genocide that is taking place in Ukraine against the Ukrainian people and against her land and against so many things. And I thought perhaps that we would go over some of the news this week. Well, basically one piece of the news, and we're gonna see where that leads us, and then get to other things as we get there. So if you have a question or a comment or a thought, please be free to come up and talk with us and join into the conversation. But I think one of the things that really sticks out in people's minds this week, as far as, well, besides what happened in Moscow yesterday, which the blowing the top, I'm sorry, I just have to mention, was just absolutely beautiful and spectacular. Um, But the drone attack, the attack on the Dormition Cathedral in Kyiv. This cathedral is old. It has a lot of history, and the attack on that, it was one of the hardest things to see. And that attack was just awful. And I know that it could have been worse, but we're talking about a 1,000 year. Sorry,
Well,
go ahead.
to clarify, the monastery itself was built in the 11th century. The cathedral that was attacked had been reconstructed after it had been blown up by Red Army troops during the First World War and then looted by the Nazi invaders. So
Exactly.
But I mean, we can talk about all of that when we get into the specifics of the article that I wrote on the attack.
Yeah.
Well, why don't go ahead?
Yeah,
Nancy.
no, I just want to say that I was fortunate today to, I know some of you may have seen online the World Virtual Tours online, where you can go with a tour guide either live to locations, or sometimes they'll do replays. And I was fortunate today to have a Ukrainian guide who is currently living in the Czech Republic, who, of course, wasn't, she is displaced, so she wasn't showing us Kyiv live. But she had video from a year and a half ago, and then in the winter of 2022, 2023, of other things as well. And she actually gave a very good virtual tour of the city, including this monastery and several other churches. And I've got to say, up until this point, what I had seen were amazingly stunning still photographs of the premises and the church before this attack. And seeing it in video, even just video by an ordinary person, not professional grade or anything like that, I completely now understand just the beauty. I had learned the cultural aspects and I had learned the history, but to see the beauty and the intricate detail in video just really amazed me. And I just wanted to share that with folks to set the stage for those of us who have not had the opportunity to see this church. And again, Ukraine will rebuild. We know that. But I just wanted to give you that picture in your mind as we dive deeper into the topic.
Thank you. That's amazing. I'd love to see it. So Gina, you did write an article about this, and I think that is a really good place to start. You're right. And so why don't you start us off and take us through that, because you always do a very good job with your articles.
You're very kind. Well, I was watching with horror. You and I were in the back channel watching this as it was unfolding. And I was able to write about it and get feedback from several folks. But for those who may not have been aware, this is it's Dormition Orthodox Cathedral. Dormition is a word meaning, in the Eastern Catholic or Eastern Christian traditions, it would refer to the falling asleep of Mary, the Mother of God, from her earthly life and then entering into heaven. If there are any Roman Catholics out there, you're probably more familiar with the term Assumption, which is how Mary is believed to have entered heaven. So this cathedral, as I said, is part of the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra. And a lavra it's from a Greek word, and it actually means, I think in the original, it means something like a fortified or a walled city, but the way it's used in Eastern Christian monastic tradition is to signify a monastery of particular importance. And that's the case in Ukraine. This is a monastery of particular importance. I was blessed to be able to visit it about 2 or 3 years ago. I did not get a chance to go into the cathedral because we arrived late. I was on assignment and we arrived late in the day, but did get a kind of whirlwind tour of what is really a very beautiful, beautiful place. And it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So the monastery itself was founded in the 1100s or the 11th century. And it's, as I said, the cathedral itself has sustained damage. In this case, previously, but in this case, it was some 8,600 square feet had been torched. And many of you probably had a chance to see Zelensky actually going up the next day onto the roof after this wave of attacks to inspect the damage. The laver itself has a website, and it says that it was the first and the most ancient monastery on the territory of what is now Ukraine, contemporary Ukraine. And it was founded by the monks Anthony and Theodosius, who are considered venerable among Orthodox Christians, meaning they're worthy of special reverence for their holiness. And the church itself in 1941 was blown up. It wasn't bombed, it was blown up from within by mines when the Red Army, during its retreat, just blew up the cathedral. And then from 1941 to 1943, Nazi invaders looted it. And by 2000, it had been fully restored and completed. And again, I didn't get a chance to see the inside. It was beautiful on the outside. But whether or not you're a person of faith, I think, as Nancy was saying, you can appreciate the beauty of places like this. And the fact that it's a World Heritage Site means it's a part of humanity. It's a part of Ukraine, of course, but it's a part of humanity. That's the idea, is that we have, as human beings, places on this earth that we recognize as being achievements pointing towards beauty, pointing towards transcendence, pointing towards something other than our generation, but that connect us throughout time, and that we want to preserve, and that we want to make sure other generations have a chance to see and to experience. And what's particularly appalling about this attack, and to be clear, as a friend of mine in Ukraine who is currently back at her home in Lviv said, even amidst this attack, as I was asking her, what's going on, she said, buildings can always be replaced. People can't. So, we do want to honor that. At last count, and I'm sure, unfortunately, this has gone up, but by the time I wrote my article, that attack across Ukraine by Russia had killed at least 11 and wounded 53. And there were at least 2 children, young children, ages 5 and 6, who were injured in Kyiv. So I think if anyone has a revised casualty count, we should probably read that into the record now. But that's any attack is significant. But to be clear in the order of priorities here, human life always comes first. So, we honor those lives that were tragically lost by Russia's latest genocidal attack. But what was really stunning to so many people was that this site is important to Orthodox Christians in Russia as well. And instantly, I thought of Transfiguration Cathedral in Odessa, where I was, where Russia had attacked basically one of the Orthodox churches that it had affinity with. And I remember standing in that cathedral a few weeks after the attack and thinking, this is insane. Because we've heard so many crazy narratives. This was back in July of 2023. And we've heard so many crazy narratives, and that also was another UNESCO site, the Transfiguration Cathedral in Odessa. To explain what the term transfiguration means, that is from Scripture. That is an episode in the earthly life of Christ where his divinity shone through, and he was literally transfigured to show himself as a divine being as well as a human being. But that was another one that people could not figure out. And the missile in that case directly hit the altar. I know that there were similar reports that this latest Russian strike also hit the altar. There was a sense of precision about this, that this was intentional. This was designed. It wasn't just a oops, which would still be terrible, but that it was an intentional hit on a place that Russia claims this spiritual affinity with. So to make sure that I present some of the Ukrainian voices that responded to this. One I quote often is Metropolitan Archbishop Gutsiak of the Ukrainian Catholic Archieparchy of Philadelphia, he's lived in Ukraine for more than half of his life as well. He divides his time between Ukraine and the United States. And he came right out and said, this is one of the most holy sites in the Orthodox world. Another bishop who is actually Roman Catholic, and who I've had a chance to interview, he is in Kyiv. It's Bishop Vitaly Krivitsky of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Kyiv, Zhytomyr. And he wrote, the Russian occupiers have once again attacked our capital in an inhumane manner. And he said, Orthodox Russia is destroying Orthodox shrines. And what is that narrative that we've heard of Russia as the bastion of orthodoxy and Christianity and quote unquote family values, these attacks give the complete lie to that, because it's evident that Russia cares very little about values, about Christianity, about no matter whatever personal piety the populace as a whole, and certainly its leaders, may practice. It is not reflected in a society that interacts with the rest of the world in a humane, upright, and moral manner. To destroy a religious site, any religious site, is not only an offense against that particular faith community and against the immediate lives who are injured or even lost, but it isn't really a crime against humanity. It is an insult and an attack on all of humanity. All of humanity is wounded and degraded when these attacks take place, and more importantly, when these attacks are not sufficiently addressed through the norms of international law and basic human morality. So I could go on and on just to wrap that up. This was also, and I think this is the direction we were looking to go towards tonight, this was also part of attacks on several cultural sites in Ukraine. This wave of attacks that came through. Another place that was attacked, and
Hey, Gina?
Yes?
I do want to just lay this out, just to say that Will and Robin went inside the lava when they were there inside the cathedral, and Will is going to come up in just a few minutes and talk about the inside of the cathedral.
After the attack or before the attack?
Oh, before. This was while Will was still in Ukraine, and
yeah. Awesome. And before we go there, as I said, just a couple of things. One other cultural site that was attacked is Mistetsky Arsenal, which is a museum and art space. And just as a preface to what Will and Robin would add here, is that these places are, and Nancy can certainly attest to this, having watched the video tour, they're places of immense beauty. Again, even if you're not a person of faith or spirituality, you can still appreciate the human effort, the human expression that goes into religious sites, and because they are part of cultural sites as a whole. The artwork, if we look at human history and artwork alone, visual arts, tremendous intersection with places of faith. These are all attempts to destroy, all of Russia's attempts to destroy Ukrainian culture, identity, and not only that, but beauty itself, to so mar human reality with its ugly vision of hatred, othering, imperialism, expansionism, chaos, division, and its 360-degree attacks upon human dignity.
Yeah.
Yep.
And go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, and I'll add too, one of the things that we knew was so very important to talk about, and what this took me back to, is when we first started doing this segment on genocide and going through definitions and meanings. That, I think, was the first time that I had learned that Raphael Lemkin he had talked and written about cultural genocide very clearly, very succinctly, and that was in early drafts of the Genocide Convention. However, it was written out of later drafts, again, a piece of work that is intended for countries worldwide to bind to contract themselves, saying, yes, we agree with this in principle, and we will enact laws to conform to its guidance. That requires a level of compromise, and the aspects of cultural genocide and of destroying a population through destroying its culture, its leaders, its literature, its history, its religion, all of those aspects were compromised out of the Genocide Convention as it is written today. Doesn't mean that those can't be pursued as war crimes and crimes against humanity, but it's clear, very clear after attacks like this, what Lemkin was writing about and why he used the words that he did. And so I wanted to make sure that we express that today as well.
Absolutely. And you know what, Nancy, I do have in front of me a paper that walks through that process of how cultural genocide was negotiated out. Unfortunately, the US played a role in that. And perhaps after Will shares, we could look at that and, you know, just because I think it's instructive to see, how did this happen in the first place? Do we need to revisit this? What instruments are covering this? Are they covering it sufficiently? It's an extremely important aspect of, you know, of countering genocide and attacks wholesale upon entire populations. To the point, I did want to read one other voice into the record responding to Russia's attack on the Dormition Cathedral, and that's Metropolitan Epiphanius of Kyiv and all Ukraine. He's the primate of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, and I know in previous sessions we've kind of presented the various Orthodox Christian congregations in Ukraine. It's a little bit more complicated and it would take a little more time than we have tonight, but he is a major Orthodox leader in Ukraine, and he posted on social media and he called Russia's attack on the cathedral another Russian crime against humanity, against history, against Christianity. What more must the Kremlin Antichrist do for the world to realize that decisive action must be taken so that the Russian terror against Ukraine and the very principles of peace comes to an end?
Absolutely. And you know, while we're waiting for Will, I think we can, you know, just saying that he will be here, I think, and we'll do that is fine, and we can go back to him when he gets here. So I think going ahead with that is absolutely perfect and fine, because you know that's something that's really key to understand. And you know, it is, I think it's interesting too, the reasons why the United States, Canada, Austria, France, and Great Britain feared that the cultural genocide would open themselves up to international legal liability, which you know is a whole nother, you know, but it really speaks to, I think, in some ways, some irrational, well, rational, because some of the things that were done to the indigenous people of the lands that were taken over are awful, and we've mentioned that previously. But if you want to go ahead and start down that road, I think that's fine, and we can just go back when Will gets here.
Sure. And I'll throw the reference in case, I don't know if Nancy already have this up in the nest, but it's something that you can access online. It's free, and it's from the book Cultural Genocide, Law, Politics, and Global Manifestations. That's edited by Jeffrey Bachman. It was published in 2019 by Routledge. I always mispronounce that one. But it's an excellent book. It's an open access book. And the particular chapter is written by Bachman himself, where he talks about chapter 2, an historical perspective, the exclusion of cultural genocide from the Genocide Convention. And as you'd indicated already, Heather, that this had a lot to do with the colonial powers thinking, here comes the reckoning, right? So, and as Nancy, as you had noted, cultural genocide was in the early drafts of the Genocide Convention. That's certainly something that Lemkin saw very clearly. The first one of the drafts initially included 3 techniques of genocide: physical genocide, biological genocide, and cultural genocide. And then through the negotiating process, this started getting edged out. And the final text, as Bachman notes, really emphasizes physical genocide. And the first 2 drafts identified the acts of cultural destruction and prohibition as severe human rights violations that alone constituted a model of genocide. I have the definition, Nancy. I don't know. I've got what the Secretariat draft had as the
definition for cultural. Yeah, please.
Yeah. So it was destroying the specific characteristics of the group by forcible transfer of children to another human group, forced and systematic exile of individuals representing the culture of a group, prohibition of the use of the national language even in private intercourse, systematic destruction of books printed in the national language or of religious works, or prohibitions of new publications, or systematic destruction of historical or religious monuments, or their diversion to alien uses, meaning you take, for example, a church and use it as an armory, which the Soviets did many, many times to various religious buildings. Destruction or dispersion of documents and objects of historical, artistic, or religious value, and of objects used in religious worship. And then there was an ad hoc committee draft that kept that language, much of it, and it further defined cultural genocide as any deliberate act committed with the intent to destroy the language, religion, or culture of a national, religious, racial group on grounds of national or racial origin or the religious belief of its members, such as prohibiting the use of the language of the group in daily intercourse or in schools, or the printing and circulation of publications in the language of the group, destroying or preventing the use of libraries, museums, schools, historical monuments, places of worship, or other cultural institutions and objects of the group. So I'll stop there, but those were the initial drafts of cultural genocide, their initial definitions in the drafts of the final Genocide Convention.
Those are very interesting and very good. It's sad to think that they didn't make it, but
well, and Lemkin himself said that because he was getting two of the framers, and this is a quote, they said that cultural genocide represented, quote, an undue extension of the notion of genocide to the protection of minorities. And Lemkin countered that a group's existence is predicated on the preservation of its spirit and moral unity. And he said the destruction of a group's culture is, quote, as disastrous for civilization as was physical destruction of nations. So, but the colonial powers were the ones that fought back. And the US and France were on the ad hoc committee for the crafting of the Genocide Convention. So this is a place where powers that already had lots of power, if you take my meaning, were writing the narrative here. Do you see what I'm saying? That there was already a power imbalance in the way this was thought through.
Yep, and just real quick, I'll note I did find the thread that I had written up in December of 2023, back in a prior life and a prior space when we had talked about this exact topic. And I'll add that into the replies as well, because all of that detail is still relevant, except unfortunately for the numbers. Like as of December 20th, 2023, UNESCO had verified damage to 334 sites since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. 125 religious sites, 147 buildings of historical and or artistic interest, 29 museums, 19 monuments, 13 libraries, and 1 archive. And that was in December 2023. Before we end today, I will attempt to find June 2026. It'll be sobering.
Yeah, that will be. And I put a tweet up in the nest from Will, and Will is here now, so I just do want to go to Will and talk to us about you were actually in this cathedral last month?
Oh yeah, just a week and a half before the attack. So it's funny, Gina, that the I put some photos up in the nest of the very building that the Dormition Cathedral inside, and not being a very religious guy, I go look at this stuff for architectural purposes, of course, but the the destruction of anybody's art, which essentially that inside to me is right. There's no religious significance at all, but you must recognize the cultural significance of something that has been around for 1,000 years. And it seems to me that the entire definition of cultural genocide was written with the Soviets in mind, because I just want to read from you a tiny little bit from the National Preserve Statement, the history inside the Lavra. You read the things, and of course the Soviets took over early in the 1920, and I'll just say that at the beginning of 1922, on the territory of the Lavra, which was closed at the time, they turned the entire facility or the entire compound into a quaint little uh, old Ukrainian looking a museum of old Ukrainian cities. And this is my favorite. Well, this is my favorite absurdity. They changed the name to the Lavra to the Lavra Museum of Cults and Everyday Life, and collected all of the religious artifacts that they could inside the lavra to keep them under, away from people to, enjoy or use normally, but then treat them like some sort of freak show. And then, of course, in the 30s, when they realized that there was some value to it, they packed up a lot of what they thought was the most valuable stuff and moved it to Moscow and other places, which, some of it has been returned now from uh, the Soviet Union after it broke up, and returned, and is displayed more, a lot more like Ukraine would like it, representing their history. But this is a place that the Soviets and the uh, Russians would really despise, because it gives a lie to a whole lot of the cultural appropriation that Russia's been trying to do to Ukraine forever, and has some embarrassing points of actual history that are demonstrably provable inside the Lavra, like when an army of 50,000 attacked the guy that's in the Dormition Cathedral. The little diorama there, where the guy is laying down in the side of that's actually, I forget his name, the famous leader of Ukraine that led the army of 30,000 that defeated an army of 50,000 Russians and sent them packing back to Russia and they didn't bother Ukraine for a couple hundred years after that. So there's some things like that Russia would absolutely like to destroy. And I'll note that propagandists on Russian TV, including Solovyov and some of the other more foaming at the mouth folks, called for the destruction of the Lavra directly, just weeks before it happened. And I linked to that up above in the post that's above the photos that I put there. Yeah, it's it. Look, that trip to, I feel like, uh, I don't know, the bad omen bringer. I was at the Hotel Ukraina, and it was struck by debris in the lobby and the bar. The bar that I never use. The bar downtown in the lobby was struck. The Chernobyl Museum was destroyed just a week after I was there. The Lavra was struck. I feel like I probably should stay home, out of range of Russian weapons, because a lot was just, they're really just focusing on, and Lavrov said he's going to do it again. They're going to focus on whatever they can culturally in Ukraine now, because they have no chance of winning anything militarily, and it's a real shame. it is. Just even if you're not religious, the architecture lost here, and you can't land a ballistic missile and Shahed drones with large explosives anywhere inside that compound and not do some structural damage to some very old buildings. That tower is, the bell tower would not withstand a whole lot of explosions adjacent to it either. So there might be more damage inside the Lavra than even you've seen, which is horrific so far.
And well, as you were talking, and I had been mentioning this in the back channels, was I think that someone who was a really helpful voice for understanding this insanity, if there is a way to understand it, is David Satter, the scholar, who, if you caught a recent, in fact, it was the night of the attacks, Jason Smart launched a Substack live video podcast and had David Satter speak. And I was just blown away by Satter's book. It was a long time ago and it never happened anyway. And in his studies of Russia, he's really made the point that this is a continuation of a Soviet mindset. And I would just encourage people to seek out his work, seek out his interviews. There's plenty of stuff out there online. If you get a chance to see Jason's interview and Jason Smart's Substack with David Satter on the June 14th, 15th overnight is when he aired it. It just speaks to, as I said, whatever kind of quote unquote logic lies behind these attacks. It is deeply rooted in a mindset, as Satter explains, that still retains a tremendous loyalty to the Soviet mindset that instrumentalizes humans. So in other words, if we look at the Dormition Cathedral and the Lavra as examples of, again, regardless of faith tradition or lack thereof, if at least as examples of human endeavor, effort, the best of our arts, of our ability to create, to hand off between generations, monuments of beauty and excellence. If we look at that and say, who could ever attack that? Why would you ever want to attack that? If you don't even have a concept of human dignity as human dignity, then nothing humans make or that honors humans is going to be important to you either. And Russia has consistently demonstrated under many regimes, Tsarist, Soviet, post-Soviet, Putinist, it's demonstrated it has no regard for human life, except for a few privileged people who would probably kill each other if they had the chance, if you put them on a desert island, So this is again, it helps us to understand, if we can, why such breathtaking evil is so easily perpetrated by Russia. If you're willing to steal 35,000 children that we know of and call it an act of preservation, heroism, whatever lie you're using to cover it, is it a stretch to think that you're going to bomb churches, take out entire communities, appropriate buildings, imprison, torture, murder, send your own people to die as expendable cogs in your machine? No, none of that. And Satter makes that point. We really need to understand just how deeply entrenched this mindset is, because we will not be able to change it unless we understand where it's coming from and not think that everything was fine once the wall fell and communism, quote unquote, ended. That is not the case here. So I just wanted to, as I say, read that into the record. It's an extremely important, Satter's work and similar work. It's very, very important in understanding that, unlike some politicians who think that everything can be solved through a real estate deal, that's not going to work here. And just because people, quote unquote, look like you at diplomatic gatherings and that they dress in Western style suits, etc., does not mean that they are operating with your values, your definitions, or even your basic respect for human life.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was having trouble pressing the button there. I found the interview from that night with David Satter, Jason did, and I will put it in the nest Yeah. But Will, thank you for those pictures because they are beautiful, and it's it's just the experience of having been in that place, and I understand what you're saying about the Chernobyl museum and things like that, but I don't think you are, man. As much as I gave you a hard time, I love you. Um, but to be able to talk to somebody who was just there, just visited, just witnessed that and the beauty that's within. People rib me and give me a hard time for, oh, here comes Heather with the Catholic hour. And because I'm always watching divine liturgies, it doesn't matter. I watch them pretty much almost daily. And why do I watch them? I watch them because I think that they are absolutely beautiful. They are stunning, and they are beautiful. And without that church, without that place, the liturgy itself cannot take place. And so you're robbing people of that beauty, of that human right to practice what they believe. And it is just, go ahead.
No, I was simply going to say, even just a place of quiet and peace. Think of it that way too. Even if you, again, don't have an inclination towards the spiritual, to be able to go into a space. I often say you could find me in one of two places, most likely, except for running around in the park and the woods: a library or a church. They're both kind of in their separate ways. They're kind of sacred spaces. Some people might say, well, a museum and a library would be my liking. But the point is, we have spaces across this earth that are places of quiet, of peace, of contemplation, of learning, of wisdom, of knowledge, of beauty. And all of those spaces need to be respected. And that's why we have programs like UNESCO, World Heritage Sites. I mean, not every structure is going to obviously qualify for that, but it's to remind us that these places matter. They are important. And not just important in the present moment. They are important because they speak to us of those who created them before us. They represent a chain of human history that created, that embellished, that restored, that handed on. They represent the present moment. And then they represent what we want to pass on to our future. And is it any wonder that, for those leaders, and especially for someone like Putin, who think no more than beyond their nose at the moment and their own lives, have nothing to contribute to future generations except a horrific and bloody lesson in what not to do. So attacking these places is also an attack upon the past and the future as well as the present.
Yeah, and it definitely is an attempt to deny Ukraine their past and their future. And that well, their past, their present, and their future. And that fabric of society that is intertwined with these types of cultural sites, whether they be religious sites or museums, monuments. They bind a community and a civilization together in ways that are hard to describe. And that again is part of what Russia is attempting to destroy.
And you know what else, Nancy,
mhm,
that
yeah.
that I find phenomenally absurd about this as an independent observer, that the Russians would destroy much of what they claim, some of what they destroyed here, it, they claim as their history. So they are so bloody minded about this that they will destroy part of their own cultural history, what they claim is their own cultural history, in order to destroy Ukraine's. This, I mean, and this is a sickness that pervades a lot of Russian society, right? This jilted lover. If I
Yep, if
can't
I
have it,
can't
I'll
have
burn
you.
it all. I'll
Hmm.
burn it all down. Yeah,
Yeah, the
and
mentality of grievance, of
and
destructive grievance.
read through that definition of cultural genocide again, and much of that was clearly written specifically to address what the Soviets did. The turning of buildings into other things is exactly what Stalin did, but Khrushchev, when he came in, wasn't even happy with that. You might not know this, but Khrushchev actually was the bigger destroyer of churches, than Stalin was. Stalin was a big converter of them to records warehouses and whatever else, or the museum of cults and weird ancient, silly village life. That the entire basis of the definition of what they did to the Lavra is the basis of the genocide definition related to cultural heritage. And this is who the Russians are. They time and time again will destroy something that you like, even if it hurts them, just to hurt you. They are very bloody minded in their approach to dealing with people that they feel that are beneath them.
Will, I'm not sure if you were on when I mentioned this, but this whole attack reminded me of the July 2023 attack on Transfiguration Cathedral in Odessa, which was another Orthodox site and also a UNESCO site. And this
And
was one of the
targeted.
churches that was there, kind of leaning towards them in some sense.
And they've always claimed Odessa is theirs. They claim it's a Russian city. And remember, Gina, they targeted that with two Onyx cruise missiles, the most expensive and accurate weapons that Russia possesses. So and then they lie about what they did, right? Oh, it wasn't. It was a military target. Look, we all know they did a double strike attack with Onyx cruise missiles that are about $6 million a piece, specifically so they could do as much damage to the World Heritage Area in downtown uh, Odessa as they possibly could, and then kill first responders who came to see it. That's Russia to a T.
It absolutely is.
And
Go ahead.
and I did find, so I'm going to go ahead and read them, and I've posted it in the nest and in the replies, the current, except it's still not current, list of UNESCO listing of damaged cultural sites in Ukraine. This is their verification. And I'm going to read the current information, which is as of June 10th, and reread the December 20th, 2023 numbers at the same time. And as of December 20th, 2023, UNESCO had verified damage to 334 sites since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Now, as of June 10th, there are 536 that have been verified as damaged. In 2023, 125 religious sites, now 154. In 2023, 147 buildings of historical and/or artistic interest, now 280. In 2023, 29 museums, now 41. In 2023, 19 monuments, now 33. In 2023, 13 libraries, now 22. And in 2023, one archive. Well, they haven't found any more archives, so I guess that's a good thing. And also in June of 2026, they list 5 archaeological sites. So just to compare and contrast those numbers, it definitely has seen an increase. What I don't know is if a site has been hit more than once. It looks like that list only counts it one time. So if you go from damage to destruction, it still is going to be listed once. And so that's something relevant to be aware of because of Russia's continuing to attack things that they've attacked before. But that is also in line with, we saw in the month of May, it was reported that I think was the highest civilian non-combat zone casualties since the full-scale invasion. And it's because Russia continues to attack the civilian population and attempt to punish them or scare them into submission because they're not successfully doing that on the field of battle. And, again, just like Germany trying to bomb London into submission and to bomb and destroy their churches, it's going to have the same effect here, but it's with clear intent. And even if Raphael Lemkin's words on cultural genocide were compromised out of the Geneva Convention, that demonstration of intent in those individual war crimes and those aggregate crimes against humanity, that intent still has a place to play in the overall crime of Russia's genocide against Ukraine. And those details will most likely be part of that demonstration that Ukraine and the world must do to show Russia's intent to destroy Ukraine as a nation and its population. Thank goodness, they have really stunk at successfully doing it, but that intent and that attempt and the individual aspects of that destruction are more than clear through this. Go ahead, Gina.
Yeah, and speaking of intent, and again, I keep going back to Satter's work on this because it is so important to see this in a historical context. I mean, yes, there is intent in the moment of an action, and we've talked before in previous spaces about with the Genocide Convention as written and that level of proof, the dolus specialis, that is so difficult to actually prove a lot of times, and a move towards a knowledge-based approach to proving genocidal intent, because most genociders aren't sitting and writing down, "Dear diary, today I thought I would commit genocide in the following 5 ways." That's not really how it works. But I think that Satter really gets us to the place where we can see just how intergenerational this mindset is. In other words, this intention to commit genocide sits within a real anthropology that of a holdover from Soviet times. And I just wanted to point, and maybe we could get this into the nest because it's worth a read, even if you don't get a chance to read Satter's actual works. But this is a 2021 review of his book, Never Speak to Strangers. And this was done by Emina Milonik in Law and Liberty on March 9th of 2021. And there are a couple of passages because she quotes him at length. And again, his argument, and he is fluent in Russian culture, a journalist by training, and then also, a real thinker in culture and not just the facts of the moment, but he sees big picture. And again, if you get a chance, please do watch his interview with Jason because it was just phenomenal. And Jason's interviewed him several times. And this is a nice, chunk of, it's a good read, this book review. It's you're going to walk away with a good sense of what Satter is trying to point towards here. But to quote from some of it, he wasn't jumping up and down when, the Soviet Union fell, in that he wasn't expecting this revolutionary change. He was much more skeptical and realized that just because a political regime falls does not mean a cultural regime falls, that people still were looking, and still today continue to look through this Soviet lens that, Will, you well know from your experience in Russia what this lens looks like in the everyday. And Satter repeatedly writes about the lack of moral structure in the Soviet Union and, after its collapse, Russia. He superbly shows that this lack of universal human values and rights didn't just appear out of nowhere, but was the result of one illusion after another that created a society entirely based on lies. It's not surprising that Russia, post-USSR, is a country lost and mired in extreme corruption and organized crime. As a taxi driver so darkly and humorously observes, Moscow was now divided into optimists, pessimists, and realists. The optimists were studying foreign languages and hoping to emigrate. The pessimists were refusing to do anything on the grounds that all effort was pointless. The realists were buying Kalashnikovs. So he, again, I know I keep beating the drum on this, but we cannot hope to hold a nation accountable for its atrocities, to hold Russia accountable for its atrocities in a meaningful way, and to prevent further atrocities from a nation that has already committed so many atrocities and shows no indication of stopping. If we do not understand this critical point, we have got to find some way to at least bring some Russians a critical mass of Russians to a place where universal human rights and values, such as are espoused in the Genocide Convention, such as are espoused in the UN Charter, the Declaration on Human Rights, you name it, all of these fine instruments that we have got to be able to get a critical mass of Russians to buy into this, to understand it, to change, to convert, or we will constantly be fighting generation after generation of genocide at the hands of an imperialistic, corrupt, genocidal nation and others like it.
I think that was an accidental unmute from Will. Go ahead, Gina. Go ahead, Gina.
That's okay. No, really, I would really love for us to have Satter on this space, just because I think his work is so important. And I just think it's so overlooked especially as we seek to see, this horrific aggression and genocide at least arrested, and then finally, prosecuted, have Russia fully prosecuted for its actions, and reparations, healing, justice, restoration for Ukraine. But we absolutely have to understand it. And what we're hearing in these discussions, this is why so many efforts to end this stall, because as we've talked about before, number one, there comes a point in the stages of genocide, especially if you look at it from the one model that James Waller talks about, where you have, upstream, midstream, downstream. Well, we're in a well downstream genocide at this point. And even in Gregory Stanton's, stages of genocide model, there comes a point when armed, overwhelming international military intervention is the only thing that's going to stop. You've got to stop the aggressor. You've got to stop the perpetrator from taking one more life. You've got to halt that. But, when we hear this just as in terms of political discussions, or as some nations, the US, want to look at mineral rights in exchange for defending human life, they're obviously not clued into the work of Satter. They're obviously looking at this at a very, very surface level. And so we're going to find ourselves continually frustrated until we get enough people to realize the deeper forces of evil at work here, and the deeper reformation that is needed in the interest of ending this genocide and preventing all future genocides, which is what the convention calls us to do. It's not just to punish existing genocides, which it certainly is, but its first word is to prevent genocide.
Will, please go ahead and Will, go ahead.
Well, and Gina, these things go hand in hand, right? Like you said, that a genocider doesn't get up in the morning and write in their diary what they're going to do today. But genociders typically do keep phenomenally good records of what they're doing, because they don't think they're doing anything wrong. They think they're doing things that are, and this is why the end of this war, not just because of the genocide that's going on here, it's also precedent setting to make sure that the 1991 borders are returned, because all the precedents that will be set in this war, if we let Russia off the hook, that will backslide us into the fruits of aggression, or issues that are related to the charter of the UN. Look, I have big problems with the UN in general, but I do like the charter of the UN and where it was attempting to take us as a world society. And if we allow this to backslide, every country that feels that they want to take something from their neighbor. Look at Venezuela's discussion about the area in Guyana that just happens to hold all the oil that they were talking about. That's the culturally theirs for a long time. That's a historically part of our country. There will be hundreds of issues like that, and with the aggression of taking over other people's territory, almost always comes along the extermination or expulsion of the people that live there, and that meets the test of genocide. And even I've had a lot of arguments with people about the West Bank and the Gaza situation. I don't feel what went on, what has happened by Israel in Gaza meets the definition of genocide. And I've had friends that have they're very angry with me. But I do feel what Israel is doing in the West Bank with settlers expelling Palestinians there does meet the test of what one of the tests of what is genocide. And we won't stop that if we let Russia get away with this. I mean, there are these all over in the world that are brewing that if we can't stop uh, Russia, and if Russia gains 1 square centimeter of Ukraine as a result of this war of aggression, it just opens the door for others. And this will once again be a failure to punish as required in the Genocide Convention unless we get every war criminal turned over for adjudication by Russia. Every one of them. Every child stealer, every chemical weapons user, every POW executor or torturer, all of them. Every one. And to the full availability to the full possibility, because we're not going forward as a society, whether you're a person of faith or just a person of ethics, unless we can address this absolute open sore, which is Russia.
Absolutely, because impunity for any type of aggression or genocide, war crimes, you name it, breeds more. That's all it does. And I remember, and I think I've mentioned it in this space several times, I was covering a live stream press conference one time, and it was a Nicaraguan dissident who had escaped. And Nicaragua is experiencing tremendous persecution of the Catholic Church there under the Ortega regime. It's quite horrific. But this, unprompted by anyone in the audience, unprompted by any of the journalists, this dissident said, "Well, they watch what Putin's doing. They watch, they see, what does he get away with, and then they implement it." So all of these strongmen are playing off of each other. And if they see they can get away with it, it emboldens them. And it's sad to say, but many of us know, either directly or from people that we know and love, we've seen this even in situations of domestic abuse or abusive relationships. I mean, once those boundaries are crossed, if those are not addressed, if people are not held accountable for their actions, for the good of themselves and the good of society, chaos ensues. Absolute chaos ensues. And it does not go away on its own. It does not get better on its own. It has to be addressed. So absolutely, Will, just as you were saying, this, every single one, there has to be prosecution, there has to be accountability, or we will only find ourselves dealing with, even if it's imaginable, greater offenses against human dignity and life.
And I just want to add two things to that topic, is that, literally while I was posting something else, my feed refreshed and I saw Timothy Snyder's statement that, and this isn't specific about Russia, but this is specific about prosecuting those who have broken laws. In places where they're doing the right thing, he says, in countries that have successfully reversed democratic backsliding in recent years, from Poland in 2023 to Hungary in 2026, opposition movements made prosecuting those who have broken laws a central campaign issue. And again, it's because of the importance of maintaining the rule of law, because otherwise you slide into strongman authoritarianism, just plain and simple. The other thing that I do want to call out, and thank you, Alan, for bringing this article forward, we've got it in the nest as well, is that the numbers that I read you previously were UNESCO's. And again, that is a larger scale. Another relevant number on damage or destruction of cultural heritage sites is the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's. And again, he called the Lavra strike deliberate erasure. And he noted that Russia has damaged or destroyed nearly 2,000 Ukrainian cultural heritage sites since 2022. Again, that's the large ones that UNESCO is going to recognize and the ones that are recognized within Ukraine alone. And noted, again, another aspect of cultural genocide and theft is that Moscow's forces looted over 7.8 million artifacts from museums in occupied territory since 2014. And this is as of June 15th, 2026, right after the missile strikes. So I wanted to make certain that we had that information in the record as well.
There's a lot that we could read into the record still. There's one thing that I want to add really quick. And I think we should wrap up. Of course, we'll, if there's more that you want to add, please. But I put something, one of the things that really hit me and has stuck with me since the night that the Lavra was hit is what happened with the bells. The bells automatically still played the national anthem that morning. And the day after that, and I can never pronounce this
And
man's.
it rained.
And it rained, yes.
To help put out the fire.
Yeah. I'm never sure that I pronounce this guy's name right, but it's Gudjez Mamedov. And he, just to tell you a little bit, just to tell you who he is a former deputy prosecutor, I believe, of Ukraine. But he was just on June 4th, it hit the news, was appointed as Deputy Chief of Military Law Enforcement Service of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. He's an officer of the 59th Assault Brigade. Anyway, but he is an expert in human rights. He has fought for human rights. Follow him. He is an amazing follow. But every single morning he posts a video of the national anthem. It can be a kid singing, it can be musical, it can be, on a bandera, it can be any number of different ways, but it's always a different version of. There's a Asian man who plays, I believe, flute or wind instruments, who's on, he rotates through his stuff too. It's very interesting, very good. It's how I know a new day has started, really, for Ukraine, is when I see him post the national anthem for Ukraine every day. But the day after that, he posted the video of the bells playing the national anthem of Ukraine. And so, and he has a good way of a good part in what is happening there. The laws of armed conflict and the violation of laws of armed conflict are crimes also. And so he is now documenting all of those for Ukraine, and I just think that's a really important role, obviously. And we see those kinds of violations on a daily basis, I think. But yeah, I wanted to go ahead and try to wrap up. I know we could probably go on for 2 more hours, but we have started to give ourselves more of a time limit on the genocide segment for everybody's sleep schedule. Um, and so I think we need to try to wrap up a little bit. Will, really thank you so much for just jumping up when I sent you a message saying, "Hey man, can you come? Because I think you were here." And I really always appreciate your viewpoint and your thoughts on such an amazing and historical religious site. Will is our most prominent and dedicated atheist. It's always interesting to get his view and his thoughts on these things, because he had
Also the biggest purveyor of church porn.
Yeah. This is true also. Church porn, as we call it.
Church porn should be non-denominational.
It pretty much is.
And we do need to clarify that definition.
Please do, Nancy. Clarify that one for us.
Yeah, it has jokingly been referred to as church porn, but what it basically is, and in particular in Ukraine, but in other places as well too, just the stunning photographs of the churches and places of worship throughout Ukraine. And basically it stops everyone in their tracks when that those images are posted because they are just so amazingly beautiful. And again, even if you're not religious, that cultural aspect of all of the care and love that went into the ideation and then the creation and construction of those places. You just see it pouring out of every photograph. And man, the stuff you guys, Will, you and Robin and Alan and others have posted is just absolutely amazing. There's not been a bad photograph of a church in the entire group of what we lovingly and sillingly refer to as church porn.
Yes, thank you, Will. And it's true. I really very much appreciate all you have done to send pictures and to document these locations where you do go and visit, because it is important and historical as well as spiritual, and very, very important for who Ukraine is, for what Ukraine for what Ukraine is and what Ukraine has persisted to be, right? And I mean, I think of an article that Robin sent yesterday, of how, and this, I don't want to get into a whole nother subject, but how the Soviets, basically tried to destroy the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, and how through all of that time, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, as well as other faiths, but this was specifically about the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, persisted underground and stayed underground. I mean, Svetoslav Shevchuk, who is now the head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church for the world, right? He started his education as a priest before the Soviet Union broke up. Go ahead, Gina, because I know you're gonna fix my.
Oh no, he
No.
is a child of the underground church, as he puts it, and that was the liquidation of what are called the visible structures of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church that was forced by the Stalinist regime. But Russia has persecuted Christians and Catholics for years, decades, centuries. So the persecution has been
Absolutely.
brutal, and imprisoned, appropriated properties, tortured, killed. Yeah, so that's a long tradition, and Sviatoslav Shevchuk stands within that tradition of heroic witnesses to faith amid absolutely demonic and annihilating forces.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we should try to wrap up, and but we will be back, of course, next week. But I will go around. I just wanted to really say thank you to Will too, and my just what I thought would be brief thank you to Will took a distraction, which Will tends to do now and then, but I love him for it. Anyway, so Nancy, do you have any final words as we wrap up here, and final words, final thoughts, and then we'll go to Gina, and then we'll wrap up and close for the evening.
No, it's been a great session, and I really appreciate everyone's engagement. And thank you, Will, for coming up and making me provide a definition I never thought I would. And yeah, it's I really we all understand the importance of culture for Ukraine, and that's why on tours over the last several years, yeah, we've got Will, our atheist, Robin, our Jew, going in and documenting Ukrainian churches of all denominations, and sharing those photographs because, again, it just shows the beauty that is created by those people. And even when the buildings are destroyed, the beauty of the people remain. And that's what we're fighting for, even if it's just with our words and our donations. Thanks.
Thanks, Nancy. Gina, go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking of something that my friend, Sister Lucia Murashko, sent to me, a voice message she sent to me. She is in the city of Zaporizhia, which of course is within, I think, now 10 to 12 miles of the front line, and very terrible night, and she sent me a voicemail saying, "We are okay. We are tired, but we are still standing by the grace of God." And I think that that is the best way I could conclude my little intervention in tonight's session, is with her words, because as we say all the time, the bells rang and the silence won't overcome those bells, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not and will not ever overcome it. As much as Russia tries to annihilate Ukraine, Russia will not succeed, and it will be held accountable for its atrocities. Ukraine will prevail. Ukraine will win, because Ukraine is on the right side. Slava Isusu Christu, Slava Ukraini.
Slava Naviki, Heroam
Heroem
Slav.
Slava.
I'm Slava.
All right. I want to thank you all for coming and joining us tonight. And it's just always a pleasure to be able to talk and to help understand. And it's a difficult subject, but we spend each time trying to understand exactly what it is that Ukrainians are going through every single day, what it is that Russians are doing, which is horrible, horrible, and atrocious things that we've seen over the years. And it's important, though, that we realize where these genocidal acts and these crimes against humanity are happening and how that they are happening, because it's important that we go out as little lights and help shine light on the darkness too, when it comes to the actions that Russia is taking against Ukraine every day. So with that, we will be back in an hour and 45 minutes, I think it is, with Will and Smokey for This Week in Absurdistan, followed by Mockers and Firefella. And boy, I wasn't prepared. They're going to have a guest on at the beginning of Booms and Woe of Christoph Christoph Mueller, who is with We Play for Ukraine. And he has a very fascinating and interesting story about how he got involved in Ukraine and ended up marrying a Ukrainian woman, and what he's been doing since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And so that should be a very, very interesting time, hearing from him and getting to know him and the things that he's doing. So with that, though, I think that I will say Skoro Popochamus.
Babachimus.
Papa.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the heart of Ukraine's struggle against Russia's genocide. A story of immense pain, unyielding resistance, and a demand for justice that cannot be silenced. Remember, genocide isn't just a tragedy for its victims. It's a crime against all humanity. Ignoring it endangers our collective future. Don't let the story end here. Share this episode, stay informed, and support those fighting for freedom and accountability. Together, we can bring light to the darkness and uphold the values that unite us all. This has been the Genocide in Ukraine podcast. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and never stop seeking the truth.